Welcome to another gold and silver stacking live stream. So, the US dollar and its foundations as the world reserve currency are going to come under attack, and very likely this attack is going to come soon. It may even come before the end of this month, believe it or not, within just a couple of weeks. And what I'm referring to is the US dollar's status as the reserve currency and its foundation, the petrodollar system. That is the system by which the OPEC nations, led by Saudi Arabia, the primary oil exporting country of the world, price their oil and gas exports in US dollars. They denominate the sales of that commodity in dollars, and they accept payment in dollars for those energy exports. And this is a system which dates back to the 1970s. In 1971, Richard Nixon took the US dollar off of gold convertibility. He ended the convertibility of the dollar into gold. And as he looked for something to replace that gold convertibility with, something to back up this new purely fiat US dollar, he hatched this plan with the other members of his administration and international oil companies and the Saudi king Faisal to have this system whereby the Saudis, and then by default the rest of OPEC nations, accept dollars for their exports, and then they reinvest those petrodollar profits into US military equipment, into infrastructure projects by US corporations, and into US debt, into treasury instruments. And that system may very well be coming to an end. It has been how the global energy markets have functioned for 5 decades, and it's never been on shakier ground than it is right now. We're going to get into that in today's video and what kind of an effect that could have on the US dollar and also on the precious metals, both silver and gold. And here's a nice little shot of King Faisal and Nixon, another one in addition to the one on the cover of this book. You can see they're just good buddies there. And that whole system is the foundation of the strategic alliance between the US and the Saudis. You know, it took the Saudis controlling this incredibly important resource, petroleum, in order to get us into this alliance with this theocratic, autocratic regime. You know, there's not a lot that the U.S. and Saudis really have in common, except for the fact that we need a lot of oil and they have it, and the world needs a lot of oil. Now, if the petrodollar does come to an end, I'm just going to say that having some physical metal in your possession, some real money, is probably going to be a good thing. It's going to be a good thing to have. And so if you are interested in acquiring some of that, make sure you check out today's video sponsor, sdbullion.com. Right now, new customers can get gold or silver at spot by visiting sdbullion.com/new. There is a link down in the description, so make sure you check them out. That's where I buy my gold and silver. I do see some folks saying hello in the chat. Hello to everybody. We got Stacking Surfer saying petrodollar is down. Well, it's going down, I think. And I do appreciate all of you for tuning in. Please do smash that like button if you find this information helpful. And while you're at it, why not subscribe to the channel? So there is a very important event that is happening in a couple of weeks. It's happening beginning August 22nd. It'll be going on through the 24th, and that is the Brics Annual Summit. Now, for those of you who are new to the channel, maybe just getting introduced to this idea, the Brics nations, that is an economic union of sorts consisting of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And there are two very important things that will be occurring at this meeting in 2 weeks. Two very important things on the agenda. First one, more of a long-term threat to the dollar, in my opinion, but this one has garnered probably the lion's share of the media attention, and that is this. What we heard from Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister. We heard back in January about this via the TASS news agency. That's a Russian news agency. When Sergei Lavrov told us that the BRICS summit would be discussing a new currency, perhaps a basket of currencies, perhaps something backed by commodities. There's been quite a bit of speculation on that front, perhaps something even backed by gold. Lots of information one way or the other about that in recent weeks. But It's looking more and more like that is not going to be unveiled. Although I do think that at this year's summit, they will at least be laying the foundations for a potential BRICS currency. And therefore, it's more of a long term threat. Now, how long does an alternative reserve currency take to get up to speed? I mean, they might have something up their sleeve. Maybe they'll unveil something, but I think it could be a project that takes years, possibly decades. The thing about a BRICS currency is if they try to unveil that too soon and it flops, they'll be worse off than when they started. So I think it'll be kind of a cautious approach there. But the other main point on the agenda of the BRICS nations at this year's meeting is going to be expanding the BRICS organization, taking on new members. And we know that there are about 20 countries, give or take a couple, that have officially applied to join the BRICS organization, and there's something closer to 40 nations that have at least informally expressed an interest in this. And one of the critical nations on the line here that may be joining the BRICS organization is Saudi Arabia. And we first heard about this last year on October 20th. The Economic Times of India ran this headline: Saudi Arabia wants to join BRICS, says South African President Cyril Ramaphosa. So after a meeting between Cyril Ramaphosa and Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, Cyril tells us that Saudi Arabia has expressed an interest in joining the organization. And there's a lot of indications, we're going to go over them here today in this video, that should this take place, should Saudi Arabia join the ranks of BRICS, that the petrodollar system will soon be coming to an end. And I mean very soon. So let's examine how we got here and where we may be heading. And I do just want to say a big shout out to Jeff Tooley Tiger Thomas. He's a channel member. Thank you for joining. Remember, if you want to support the channel, if you enjoy these videos, you can click that join button. It's $2.99 a month, about the price of a silver dime, a little bit more, as we've seen the price of junk silver decline recently. But if you do want to support the channel, that's a great way to do it, and I hugely appreciate that. So, China, Saudi Arabia, and also Russia really have been increasing their ties recently, over the past year or so. We had Saudi Arabia and China signed comprehensive strategic partnership agreements. This was last year in December at the Gulf China Summit that was held in Riyadh, the Saudi capital, in December. And this is really just the beginnings of it. I mean, this relationship between China and Saudi Arabia in particular goes very deep indeed. We'll be getting into the details of that, but let's just say that China is the #1 purchaser of Saudi oil, and so they exert a tremendous influence there. They're very important to the kingdom. And, Saudi Arabia is looking for new partners. They are still technically a strategic ally of the U.S., as was, set up between Nixon and Faisal back in 1974, but there's a lot of problems there. I mean, if you recall last year when the Saudis they cut oil production, despite the fact that President Biden had requested that they not do that, there was a huge amount of pushback. Politicians on both sides of the aisle here in the U.S. were talking about cutting off arms shipments to the Saudis. They were talking about passing the NOPEC bill. So, the U.S. relationship with Saudi Arabia is on shaky ground. And it's kind of always been on a shaky foundation because they're this kingdom that, it doesn't really have a great human rights track record. There's a lot of things that folks in the U.S. don't really care for that go on in the Saudi kingdom, but they've got the oil, so that's why we've got this alliance. But it's not the, firmest foundation. And certainly China, they don't really care one way or the other about the Saudi human rights record. They're not going to have to worry about that with China as a partner. China's going to let them do whatever they need to domestically in order to keep the oil flowing. We also had this news from February 13th, earlier this year. Russia and Saudi Arabia step up military technical cooperation. So, they have, far from condemning the Ukrainian conflict and the Russian aggression there, or what a lot of people might characterize as the Russian aggression. I'm not really picking sides, but they're remaining neutral there, and they're actually deepening their ties with Russia. We had according to this article in the Middle East Monitor, Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu announcing that his ministry is committed to the dynamic development of military technical cooperation with Saudi Arabia. So, again, this is setting the stage for them to join the Brics organization. And I mean, the breadcrumbs are there. You don't have to be a genius to follow the narrative here, and that Saudi Arabia is deepening its relationship with members of the Brics organization, and it is getting ready to abandon its strategic relationship with the U.S. I mean, they are walking a very careful line here. They're treading carefully, and I think that that's probably because, they don't know which way the winds will shift. They may be trying to leave a door open to, saddle up to the U.S. if necessary, but certainly the trend seems to be that they are finding new partners, and that is confirmed by this story from May 27th from the Financial Times. Saudi Arabia in talks to join the China-based Brics Bank. So this is the Brics New Development Bank. It is based out of China, and they plan to join that, also just setting the stage for further integration of the Saudi economy with the Brics bloc, getting set up with that organization. Now, this is a really amazing one. This is a headline from 2 days ago from Bloomberg. And this, if this doesn't show you where the global dynamic is heading, where this relationship between Saudi Arabia and China is heading, I don't know what does. This headline: Saudi oil flows to China set to soar despite global supply curbs. So Saudi Arabia has been cutting its oil production in an attempt to bolster oil prices, and it's working. The price of oil is now well up over $80. And yet, despite the fact that the Saudis are cutting production, according to this report from Bloomberg, China is poised to take about 40% more crude oil from Saudi Arabia via term contracts next month as a mega refiner starts taking more oil under a new deal. So that means that someone else is going to be getting a lot less oil, because the Saudis are cutting production, but they are sending 40% more to China. Now their primary economic partner, their main trading partner, the biggest destination for their crude oil, the number one purchaser of their oil, and now they're sending 40% more. I mean, the increase month over month is from 37 million barrels this month in August to 52 million barrels projected next month in September. So just let that sink in. I mean, that is a massive increase in a 1 month period. 52 million barrels to 37 million barrels. And not only that, they are signaling that they are going to continue increasing their investments and integration with China. This is a report from August 7th. Saudi Aramco, that's the state-owned oil firm in Saudi Arabia, signals further investments in China. Now, this is despite the fact that their profits are declining. They are still going to be pumping more capital into these projects. And I want to go back to an article from March. This is one we covered extensively on this channel, but this is the deal that was set up back then. Saudi Aramco boosts China investment with 2 refinery deals. So the Saudi Arabians, they're buying up interests in these oil refining facilities in China. They send the crude oil over there. Then it gets refined, and they're profiting all along the supply chain. And this is part of the Saudi efforts to diversify their economy into not just being an oil producer, but in this case, also a major producer of petrochemicals. And the way that they're doing that is they're investing billions and billions of dollars in these Chinese petrochemical refining operations, to which they then send massive amounts of oil. And so, this deal was inked back in March. And what do we see now, according to Bloomberg? A 40% increase in the amount of Saudi oil being sent to China. And this is largely due to these significant investments in Chinese oil refining infrastructure. Now, this goes right in line with what we were told by the Saudi Aramco CEO back in March 21st of 2021. This is from Reuters. The Saudi Aramco to prioritize energy supply to China for the next 50 years. The CEO of Saudi Aramco telling China that they were committed to making China's oil needs their highest priority. This is the quote. This is the quote itself. Ensuring the continuing security of China's energy needs remains our highest priority, not just for the next 5 years, but for the next 50 and beyond. So, I mean, again, more foreshadowing of what is to come. It doesn't take a genius to figure out what is happening here. I mean, they are telling us out in the open what their plans are. The CEO of Saudi Aramco planning for the next 50 years with China. Now, why does any of this have to do with the petrodollar? Well, think about it. I mean, the Brics nations, one thing we heard, there's been a lot of discussion about this Brics potential gold-backed currency, and there's been kind of some pushback. I mean, Sergei Lavrov tells us it will be discussed. There was, I believe, a South African ambassador who emphasized that that was not on the agenda, and this summit is being hosted in South Africa this year. But one thing that everybody is very clear on in the BRICS organizations, even those who have told us that there won't be a new currency, is that they will be continuing to look to local currencies for settling bilateral trade between BRICS members, and that is extremely important. Well, if Saudi Arabia joins BRICS, what do you think is going to happen? I mean, this is what President Xi Jinping was calling for at the Gulf China summit last December. He was calling for oil to be traded in yuan, not just by Saudi Arabia, but all of the Gulf states, many of them OPEC members. And, after that, one thing that we did see earlier this year, we saw a deal brokered between French energy giant Total Energy and China, in which 65,000 tons of UAE gas, so that's Gulf natural gas, was sold to the Chinese, and the deal was denominated in Chinese yuan. Now, the Chinese yuan is one of the local currencies. We've had President Xi visiting Saudi Arabia, visiting the capital, petitioning them for the sale of gas and oil in yuan, and we know that the Saudis are open to this. How do we know that the Saudis are open to the selling of their oil and gas in Chinese yuan? Well, they told us as much. Saudi Arabia open to talks on trade in currencies besides the dollar. This was at Davos earlier this year. This is the Saudi finance minister who said in an interview with Bloomberg Television that Saudi Arabia would consider selling their oil for currencies besides the dollar. Now, I mean, what currency could they be talking about? Obviously, the yuan is the currency he was referring to. And if we start seeing oil and gas from Saudi Arabia sold in yuan, it will only be a very short time before all of OPEC begins denominating their sales in other currencies. Now, that doesn't mean that they're not going to sell oil for dollars or gas for dollars, but it does mean that they're not going to be exclusively selling their gas and oil in dollars. Maybe the price won't be denominated in dollars. That will be a huge blow to the US dollar status as the world reserve currency, and it will create a massive upheaval in the global economy. I mean, you're going to see a lot of dollars that are around the world right now flowing back into the US. That will trigger inflation. And I want to talk about some of the other knock-on effects here in just a moment and what this really could be and why this is such a devastating time for the end of the petrodollar to come, because I mean, it really couldn't happen at a worse time. But one thing I do want to comment on briefly is there was in the media recently, there has been quite a bit of pushback about the BRICS currency. First of all, that story, I mean, you probably saw a lot of videos about a BRICS currency. RT, Russia Today, was running headlines about a gold-backed currency. But also, we've heard a lot of pushback in the Western media about dissent in the BRICS organization about expansion. We heard that Brazil and India were opposing the inclusion of Saudi Arabia specifically because of their autocratic nature. Maybe we should look at some more democracies to add to the group, was the idea, is what India and Brazil were supposedly saying. But maybe Brazil is voicing some opinion. That is possible. But I found this very interesting. This was an article from India Today that was run on August 4th, in which India claims that the reports that it opposed BRICS expansion were nothing more than baseless speculation. So, you know, you got to take all this news with a grain of salt. I mean, let's face it, we are in the midst of a massive fifth generational geopolitical conflict. It's economic warfare, it's kinetic warfare, it is conflict on every front here, and it's likely only going to get worse as we continue to move forward. But I just want to point out that India, they're open to Saudi Arabia joining Brics, and when you see these stories run in the Western media about how, oh, Brics won't do this, Brics won't do that, you got to take it with a grain of salt. And I mean, same goes, of course, when you look at, you know, groups like RT. I mean, that's Russian state-owned media basically for the West. So, don't take all of that at its face either. But there really are very few unbiased actors without an agenda. So I just want to point that out. And, this claim by the Indian official here that the Indian opposition is nothing more than baseless speculation kind of, contributes to my view that that's the case. So let's talk about why it's going to be so damaging to the dollar to have the petrodollar come to an end right now. Well, one of the big reasons is because those petrodollars, what the Saudis do with them and what the other OPEC nations do with them, a lot of it gets put into U.S. treasuries, U.S. debt instruments. They buy U.S. debt so that they can get some yield on all of those petrodollars that they're holding. Currently, Saudi Arabia has more than $100 billion worth of U.S. treasuries. They're one of the major holders. And the reason that this is such a bad time for this to happen is because we're going to be selling a lot of U.S. treasuries moving forward. There was a headline the other day in Bloomberg about how the Treasury is going to be expanding its treasury auctions to larger than what they had originally anticipated. And the reason is, this is the Treasury latest statement, by the way, the monthly statement, the deficits are absolutely exploding. The deficit spending in Washington, which has to be financed by the auctioning off of more treasuries, is absolutely exploding. So this is the year-to-date deficit. It's going by the fiscal year, by the way, which starts in October. $1.613 billion. That's the current year-to-date deficit. This is the monthly deficit, $221 billion. Now, let's compare that to last year's Treasury report from the same period. Now, the monthly deficit back then was comparable, $211 billion. So, you can't take any individual month out of hand. But look at the year-to-date deficit from last year from this same time period, $726 billion. So we've more than doubled the annual deficit year over year. That's a massive increase in the deficit spending. And all of that has to be financed by more borrowing. And we're witnessing that. We're seeing a spike up in treasury yields. And look at this. I mean, we've looked at this chart a lot lately, but it's just such an incredible one. This is the interest payments on the U.S. national debt going parabolic, spiking up as yields on U.S. treasuries have been skyrocketing. And if not only these OPEC petrodollar recipients stop buying U.S. treasuries, I mean, that alone could trigger a further spike up in U.S. Treasury yields, which is going to mean more interest on this ballooning debt and deficits. But they may begin selling the ones that they already have. So that's going to be a huge problem for the U.S. dollar. It is going to lead potentially to an intervention by the Federal Reserve. They'll have to come into the market, buy up treasuries to keep yields from spiking. And when that happens, the price of gold and silver will absolutely explode. Now, that's not a guaranteed thing. I'm not even saying that the end of the petrodollar in August is guaranteed. Now, certainly, I mean, the petrodollar is going to end at some point. The question is when, but the writing is on the wall that it's probably going to be very soon, and it could be literally within weeks. Now, I do think that it will take something like a, black swan event to pop the massive debt bubble that we have been accumulating here in the U.S. and to force the Federal Reserve to intervene. But something like the end of the petrodollar, which has been, a foundation of the U.S. dollar's reserve status for 5 decades. I mean, we've really never had a fiat U.S. dollar without some kind of commodity backing it, right? I mean, the gold standard ended in 1971, gold convertibility, the Bretton Woods Agreement, that ended in 1971. And then by 1974, we had the implementation of the petrodollar. So just a few years there. And, if this fails, the petrodollar, there's not going to be any more commodity to come save the day to back up the dollar. And so we're going to see the dollar go into free fall when this ends, very likely. I mean, from a combination of factors. One, less demand for US dollars around the world, less demand for US debt around the world. I really do think that should we see an end to the petrodollar system, the Fed will be forced to come into the market and expand their balance sheet, buy up treasuries to prevent yields from absolutely exploding. And look at this long-term chart here of the Federal Reserve's balance sheet. This goes back to 2008 financial crisis time. You can see their balance sheet was under a million, not under a million, under $1 trillion. We're looking at trillions here. This is real money, folks. Under $1 trillion there. It exploded up in 2008. I mean, they basically went on this long run of buying up U.S. debt. And then, they get to here, inflation starts to run out of control, and they say, oh, we're going to reverse course and sell off all these treasuries. Well, that's how far they've gotten, folks, and we're already seeing, I mean, you saw the debt chart, right? You saw what's happening to the interest payments on U.S. debt. And when the Fed sells these treasuries into the market as part of what they call quantitative tightening, it forces yields up. And there's no way they can get this back down to zero. I don't even think they're going to be able to break the 8 trillion mark. I mean, one of the things I've been calling for on this channel is the Fed's balance sheet to hit $10 trillion before it hits 8 again. I mean, who knows? I don't have a crystal ball, but I do think that we're going to hit 10 trillion before we get down to 8. And the catalyst for that very well could be the end of this petrodollar system. If the Saudis begin selling their oil for yuan, if around the world you no longer need dollars to buy oil, then there's going to be a lot of dollars flooding the market. The dollar is going to be devalued, and at the same time, we could see a perfect storm where less nations around the world are willing to absorb U.S. treasuries, absorb U.S. inflation, absorb U.S. debt, and that means that you're going to see a massive debt bubble coinciding with massive inflation, coinciding with potential Fed intervention. But, this time, if they want to bail out this economy and this amount of debt, they're going to have to intervene in such a truly massive way that the dollar is toast. I mean, that's really how I see it. I'm not infallible. You don't know what you don't know, but that's what I see coming. That is why I continue to acquire hard assets like gold and silver as I prepare for the potential end of the dollar. But that's pretty much it for today, folks. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Is the US dollar destined to lose its status as the world reserve currency because of the end of the petrodollar? Or do you think that the Saudis are going to continue selling their oil for dollars in perpetuity? I see someone raising their hand in the comments there. I'll let this thing run for a minute. Anybody got any questions, feel free to put them in the chat and I'll get right to it. I may have ignored the chat a little bit. I kind of got on a little bit of a rant today, but it's just how these live streams roll sometimes. Carrie, Boren, if you have a question, let me know. People are probably already beginning to drop off. It's all about the black swan, Stacking Surfer says. Yeah, it is all about the black swan. That's right. And, technically a black swan should be something that you can't see coming, but I think that this one is staring us right in the face. And as soon as investors realize what this means for the dollar, it's going to mean real problems. I don't see anything coming through in the chat, so I'm going to let everybody go. Thanks for watching, everybody. Please smash that like button. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. I really appreciate all of you tuning in today. Stay safe and happy stacking, everyone. Smart Silver Stacker out.